Webster Griffin Tarpley, a doctor of history and economics. He features, of course, every week or two here on the radio show as one of our analysts. He's also in my film, Fall the Republic and the Obama Deception. And he's done some of the most hardcore, in-depth research out there. I really respect his opinion. Now, look, I know that Russian intelligence services have staged false flag events before. The British do it. The Israelis do it. The U.S. does it. This is a tool of government. And Paul Watson wrote an article saying Moscow Metro Blast, another FSB inside job. And then Watson looks at the fact that in 99, police caught FSB planting bombs in a fourth apartment building. 3 had been blown up. Now, Tarpley would say this is some type of triple, double-cross false flag by the West. And he's got quotes from Putin saying similar things. But I look at 99. Putin wasn't probably going to win as the vice president of Yeltsin. But then saying the Chechens had attacked gave him a pretext as vice president to lead a popular war. But Tarpley and I have argued back and forth about this. I'm only looking for the truth. And I know that Tarpley's looking for the truth on this. But I know that the West got behind Putin and Medvedev and others and said, oh, yes, clearly, the Al-Qaeda groups have attacked you, and now they've got troops in the subways and here in the U.S. and England, and they're really hyping this up. We also have all these militias getting set up, clearly setups all over the country, and mainstream media trying to tie me into it, just all over the place. CNN, Fox, they're really coming after us right now. I want to ask Tarpley why we're so much in the crosshairs. Clearly, this is an attempt to demonize any populist or true constitutionalist movement in the Tea Parties and make them fully run by the Republicans. And I was talking to Tarpley about that during the break. He agreed on that front. And I see April to be a big month of staged events. You've got the insurance companies taking over health care. We'll get Tarpley's take on that. Webster Griffin Tarpley, what do you want to tackle first? The militia information?
Why don't we go let's go with Russia, because this gets us the big picture in the world.
Go.
The Moscow subway bombing. So with these things going back now decades, right? The Chechen and related Caucasus, North Caucasus terror groups, and there are about a dozen very small nationalities, ethnic groups there. It's called the ethnic labyrinth of the North Caucasus, because there's Chechnya, Dagestan, the Circassians, Kabardino, Balkaria, tiny little entities. It's the most diverse area in the world in that sense, and it's been an area of conflict for centuries. Really, it was the border between the Turkish Empire and the Russian Empire. So the CIA and British support for Chechen terrorism is just notorious, right? The leader of the Chechen terrorists was this guy Basayev, who was trained in a CIA camp in Afghanistan, and this is just well known. So the suspect is, the suspicion always goes directly to the U.S. and the British. Putin said back in 2001 that if you want to join the Chechen terror organization, you can go to London, and there's a place where pretty much openly they do recruiting for that, right, in the middle of Londonistan. So the question is, why now, right? There was this attack last November on the Moscow to St. Petersburg Express, right, the Nevsky super train that they have, and that killed about 30 people. Now, the Russians have tracked down and killed the person that they say is responsible for that, and that was wrapped up at the beginning of March, about a month ago now. So in the meantime, though, what's the big picture? Remember, the goal of the U.S. is to split Russia from China, right, to drive a wedge between Russia and China and foment conflict there. They're also interested in being friends with Russia. We just have this new nuclear arms treaty, right, the so-called START treaty between Russia and the United States. Nobody really knows the details yet, but it's going to be signed soon, and then presumably we'll see it, to play Russia, however, against China and against Iran. In other words, the U.S. becomes friends with Russia, but for a price, and the price always is friction with China, friction with Iran, because the idea is to get conflict going in those areas. Now, the anger and resentment on the part of the Anglo-Americans against Russia would be this. We just had the meeting of Putin now the Russian prime minister, with this guy, Xi, his name is. It's written XI. He's the vice president of China, and he's going to become the president of China. At least he's the heir apparent. When the Chinese Party Congress meets in the fall of 2012, this guy, Xi, again with XI, is going to become the president if all goes according to what is thought. So this idea is already important, that Putin is cementing a permanent alliance of Russia with China, right? That's the elementary thing for anybody in the world to be able to resist the Anglo-Americans. Now, the other thing is Ukraine, right? Ukraine, we had this big color revolution staged by Zbigniew Brzezinski, NATO intelligence, and so forth. And they took over the government with a puppet regime in the fall of 2004. And that puppet regime is now completely gone. The puppet president, Yushchenko, is out. The puppet prime minister, Timoshenko, is out. And the guy you have in there now is Yanukovych, and he's more or less a reasonable Ukrainian, right? Not a slave of Moscow, not a slave of NATO or the European Union, but a Ukrainian. And that is not enough, however, for the NATO side. The other thing then is what the Russians are doing in Iran. In Iran, the color revolution there never got off the ground. It seems to have just about disappeared completely. Right?
All right, let me stop you for a moment as we continue to go around the different geopolitical regions here, Webster. This is the issue. Why, and we know that a lot of the different Chechen and Muslim minority groups, and some areas majority groups in that entire area, we know the West has been funding them since during the Cold War. Of course, you go further east over into Afghanistan and those areas, they were publicly funded as mujahideen and these great saviors. So we know that's going on. But answer me this. Why would the West want to start bombing Putin when he is running for the presidency, when an elementary school student who understands this would know that terror attacks against a government official who can then lead a war against it would sweep him to power if the establishment knew that Putin was going to arrest and kick all these Anglo-American Rothschild-type bankers out of the country. And then fast forwarding after you answer that, how does this hurt Putin and Medvedev? How does that hurt them when this will clearly allow them to crack down, expand operations, and play the part of strong men protecting the Russian bears' cubs? I mean, I'm just trying to understand the key bono here. Who benefits?
Just remember now that there is a strategy of the U.S. and the British, which was published in a somewhat diluted form in the London Economist back in August, September of 2004, how you split Russia, in other words, break up the whole Russian Federation, starting from these places in the North Caucasus and the South Caucasus, because you've got Georgia there, you've got Armenia, you've got Azerbaijan, but then in the North Caucasus you've got this array of a dozen others. And the idea is that if you can get an endless civil war in this area, this can then spread to other smaller units of the Russian Federation. In other words, the non-ethnic Russian parts of the Russian Federation, because the Russian Federation is a big multinational state, right? It's got all sorts of different ethnic groups in it. So the idea is always to use this for greater splitting. Now, concerning Putin, of course, is heavily identified with the KGB, FSB, and the security services. So to a significant degree, his reputation depends on effective fighting against these terrorists, right? So if you have a big, high-profile event like this, in a certain way you could say, well, this makes Putin look bad. Maybe in the secret councils of the Kremlin, people come forward and say, hey, Putin, you're not doing a very good job. And the hope, I think, is of the Anglo-Americans, once again, to drive a wedge, in this case a wedge between Putin and Medvedev, so that Putin looks bad and Medvedev, who is a relatively untested figure by comparison to Putin. We don't know really how Medvedev responds to these things, to try to split them and foment the conflict at that level. So I think that's something real. There's also a series of people that are identified with Putin as prime minister, the head of the security agency, the head of the rail system, and so forth, and targeting the Putin faction and creating trouble this way. But just concerning Iran, the color revolution there is failing, and it's failing with Russian help. Russian help now very specific. The Russians have started, once again, building the Bushehr nuclear reactor. And one of the big goals of the U.S., the British, and the Israelis is to prevent this Bushehr nuclear reactor from ever going online. Finally, and this gets us into Europe, you have this South Stream pipeline. There are two competing pipelines there in the sort of from the Black Sea over to southern Europe. One of them is the South Stream. That's the Russian plan, and that has the support of Turkey, which, again, London and Washington don't like, and above all of Italy, and that's Berlusconi.